Hello, my name is Óscar Gonçalves. Today I'm here at the University of Coimbra Botanic Garden, which has been located at the core of our university campus since 1772. As we walk among those more than 13 acres of plant collections from distinct latitudes and different continents, it is impossible not to wonder what it's like to be one of those trees, with their branches intertwining like networks in our brains. As exemplified by this Salvador Dali's masterpiece, can we depict the presence of a mind in a vegetative being? Or does a vegetative state, plant's life, contradict the very own existence of consciousness, as implied by the way we commonly refer to an unconscious patient as being in a vegetative condition? Can we identify if an organism is conscious at all, even when it apparently, as in the case of these trees in this garden, they seem to be in a vegetative condition? This is exactly what I'll be addressing on this third episode of Neuroscience of Consciousness. Searching for consciousness. We may think of being conscious as synonymous of being awake. Conscious experience would be, in that way, regress to two states, either being awake or sleeping, switching on or switching off, nothing in between. This simple dichotomy would come up quite handy in classifying disorders of consciousness. You either have it and you are conscious, or don't and you are in some sort of coma. However, the situation promises to be much more complex than this. In order to illustrate this complexity, let me share an event that took place in 1993 in Cambridge, UK, and ended up being a truly game changer in the experimental study of consciousness. The clinical attention of a young neuropsychologist, Adrian Owen, was caught by the case of a patient named Kate, a 26-year-old woman who suffered an acute disseminated encephalomyelitis and lapsed into a coma state. As it is often the case, in a few weeks, she evolved to a condition in which she could sustain her eyes open, maintain sleep-wake cycles, despite not having any signs of consciousness. She was thought to be in what was referred at that time as a vegetative condition. David Min and Adrian Owen and colleagues undertook the challenging enterprise of functionally scanning Kate's brain to probe for the existence of any residual consciousness. The presentations of images of familiar faces activated Kate's fusiform face area, which is the region responsible for processing faces in humans. Curiously, the unplanned exposure to the computer screensaver just before the face presentations was responsible for the activation of her primary visual cortex. For the first time, researchers showed that the brain of a supposedly unconscious patient responded to external stimuli of different levels of complexity. However, the question remained, was this evidence that Kate was conscious of those stimuli? In order to address this question, a few years later, Adrian Owen undertook an even bigger challenge with a similar and responsive, wakeful young woman who suffered a traumatic brain injury. The patient underwent an fMRI testing that involved the presentation of spoken sentences, both simple sentences and more ambiguous and complex sentences. Again, data showed that the patient was processing language in the expected brain regions associated with simple, which is the middle superior temporal gyrus, and ambiguous sentences, here illustrated as the inferior frontal gyri. However, the ultimate test of conscious access was put forward when the authors analyzed brain response to commands by having the patient imagining playing tennis, when contrast with imagining visiting the different rooms around her house. Surprisingly, a patient otherwise deemed unconscious responded to these verbal commands with the activation of the expected brain regions also evident in healthy controls. More specifically, this activation of the supplementary motor region for the tennis imagery, contrasting with increased parahippocampal, posterior parietal, and premotor activity in response to navigation command. Mental response to a verbal command, as assessed by the activity in task-dependent brain regions, was about replacing open motor response as the core consciousness marker in clinical settings. These examples illustrate the possibility of reaching out to patient consciousness even when faced with limited introspective access, and that patients report to be in vegetative condition were indeed evidencing consciousness. They not only have a covert brain automatic response to different stimuli, but they seem to exhibit a cognitive motor dissociation in which an whole world of subjective experience is locked by an unresponsive body. This is the reason why we don't anymore dare to refer to such clinical conditions as vegetative states, but instead to a more subtle, unresponsive wakefulness. But unresponsive only to the extent that they are not responding to our questions. But are we asking the right questions to probe consciousness, to our fellow human beings, as to the birds inhabiting this garden, or even to the trees? In the next week, I'll be discussing how neurosciences are progressing in tuning in the right questions.